Hi, girls. I'm glad to see you all today. Today's Sunday, April the 19th, and it's our fourth Esther lesson. And today we're going to cover Esther chapters 7 and 8. Chapter 7 is very short, it's only 10 verses, and chapter 8 is 17. It's not that much longer, but a little more meat in the second chapter than the first. If you remember last week, old Haman had he had had to parade Mordecai around through town and say, oh, this is what the king does to the man he delights to honor. And he's got on the royal robe and he's on the royal horse, and everybody's going, wow, wow, wow. And he is just beside himself. He goes home and tells his family about it. And so he's got them building the gallows for Mordecai. And the servants come and whisk him away, and it's time for the second banquet. So that's where we're going to pick up today. The king went with Haman, and they went to go dine with Queen Esther, and they're sitting around, they've had a delicious meal, I'm sure, and the king says, all right now, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. So he tells her this again. He's really serious about this. He is going to just lavish her with gifts. Anything you want, my darling wife. He's really going to give her that. So then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me my life. That is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we had merely just been sold as male and female slaves, she said, I would have kept quiet. If it wasn't about our death, I probably wouldn't have spoken up. If we had just been sold into slavery, like we've been for years and years, maybe I wouldn't have said anything. But because that really wouldn't justify disturbing the king. And King Xerxes is upset by this, and he says, Queen Esther, who is he? Who is the man who has dared to do such a thing? And Esther points and says, the adversary and the enemy is this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen because he knew something terrible. He'd done something terrible and he was about to get caught. So the king got up in rage, and he left the table and he went out into the palace garden, and he's kind of pacing back and forth. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther because he sees how much authority she has and power with the king. So he stays behind to try to beg for his life. And so just as the king is coming back into the dining area from the palace garden, Haman was throwing himself at her feet on the couch where she was laying back reclining. She kind of stepped away and was like, well, okay, and on a reclining lounge chair kind of a thing. And the king exclaimed, will he even attack the queen while she is with me in the house? He's so mad. He thinks maybe, Haman's trying to take advantage of her. So as soon as the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. They came in, the servants came running in and put a bag over his head. And then Harbona, one of the servants who attended the king, said, a gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king, save the king's life. Haman was going to try to kill him. And the king said, well, hang him on it. What irony again. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided, and I imagine Haman's family is standing around gawking, cannot understand what's happened, not so long ago. Of course, they had warned him, and they said, Mordecai, the Jewish man, is going to be the ruin of you. And sure enough, he was, wasn't he? So here's this twist of fate. Haman, who was second in command and came up with this evil plot to try to have all the Jews killed. Well, remember, he had gotten the king to sign a decree, an edict, and they had sent it out to all the provinces, and it was several months ahead, but still, once you write something, remember, it cannot be undone. So they, just to I guess maybe make a point for Haman, what he had tried to do to poor Mordecai was done to him. He was killed for being evil and betraying the king, really. And, he had told him, oh, there's this group of people. There are some people. He never would really call them by name. And you'll notice Esther says, spare my life and my people. So she's identifying herself there and saying, look, I'm a Jewish woman. These are my people. The Jews are. So that same day, so here, King Xerxes is feeling bad. He's thinking, oh my gosh, what can I do? So he gives Esther the estate of Haman, who was the enemy of the Jews. And remember what a wealthy man he was. So he gives her all that. And then Mordecai came in to the presence of the king, and Esther had told how he was related to her. And she said, the man that helped save you is my cousin. He raised me. He's a good man. And so the king took off his signet ring. He had got it back from Haman before they had taken him away to the gallows, and he gave that to Mordecai. So now he's made Mordecai second in command, and Esther appointed him to be over all of Haman's estate. And Esther thought, oh, this is wonderful, but so she fell at the king's feet, weeping and crying, and she said, we need to find a way to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended this golden scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. And she said, if it pleases the king, and if he regards me with any favor and thinks it's the right thing to do, and if he's pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? And King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai, and he said, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows. Now, you two, write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. So he can't go back and undo the other one. So he's saying, y'all have got to come up with a way to override that. And so at once all the royal secretaries were summoned, and they came in and they wrote out all of Mordecai's orders to the Jews, and it went out to all the governors and the nobles in all the 127 provinces from India to Cush, which is over by Egypt, all of the Middle East that King Xerxes ruled over. And these orders were written in the script and the language of each province and of each people, and also for the Jewish people in their own script and language. So Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes. He sealed the dispatches with the king's ring, which, remember, we said you might put some wax on it and then dip the ring in it so there would be a seal that would say, something like from the house of the king of Persia, or from the house of King Xerxes, or in the words of King Xerxes, somehow that people knew it was from the king. So the king's edict, the one that they came up with, the new one, granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them and their women and children. And they also got to plunder the property of their enemies. Now, this was something they had never been allowed to do. They were allowed to fight back and defend themselves. And as long as they'd been living there, they were still sort of subservient to the Persian people. and then to the Agites and the Amalekites and all the people that had long been their enemies. They were their enemies. The day came for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month in the month of Adar. And remember, we said they casted lots, which were little stones, and they landed a certain way. I don't really understand that, but it was like a gamble. So they wrote that on the day that they were supposed to be attacked, they were going to defend themselves. So a copy of this edict went out to every person in every land, every province, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to defend and avenge themselves on their enemies. And the couriers which took the royal horses raced out, spurred on by the king's command. And the edict was also issued in the citadel of Susa, which was where the palace was. Mordecai left the king's presence that day wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold and a purple robe of fine linen, and the city of Susa had a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city, wherever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jewish because the fear of the Jews had come upon them. So that's kind of where we're left here. They think they found a way out. They've had to write another edict because they can't just say, okay, that one doesn't matter anymore because it's been written. I don't understand that law. That seems kind of silly to me, doesn't it? But they realized they had to somehow override it, and they had most of all to be able to defend themselves. So I'm sure they're praying about that and asking God for strength and authority and ways to be able to rule and, to overcome what's about to happen to them. And there's been such a turnaround in this. At the first, the king and everybody, they're eating and drinking wine, and he, the king is being so kind, and he says, well, Esther, my darling, whatever you want. He's very generous with her. Again, he's trying to be very generous. And Esther is just so polite, and in keeping with her royal position, is just like, if I have found favor with you, oh king, and if it pleases your majesty, please grant me this. So she's given him every option to say no if he wanted to. But luckily he doesn't. And she goes on to tell him the details of this plan. And he's so shocked, and he says, who would do this? And she points and says, well, that evil Haman over there. He's the one who's doing that. So Haman knows at this point that his fate is sealed. He knows he's going to be killed. And so he while the king goes outside, he goes over to Esther and tries to beg for his life. And the king comes in, and he sees him kind of trying to fall on her, and he thinks, oh, he's really trying to take advantage. Soon as he raises his voice, all the servants rush in, and they put a bag over his head, because they know what they're going to do. And they come up with a quick way to dispose of him. And they apparently didn't like him either. And they're like, oh, here's the irony. He's built that gallows over there for Mordecai. And Mordecai was the one who saved your life, and that you had parade through town today. And the king Xerxes says, well, hang him on it then. Get rid of him. And so Esther, by using the words, I and my people, she's telling her husband, the king, that they are one and the same. To hurt her people would be to hurt her. And the king does not want to do that. And so she's not sure that, remember she had said something about he hadn't summoned her in 30 days. So she's being very gentle and tenuous in her approach to him, and he is glad to see her. And so he grants her whatever she wants. And so there's this big turnaround of events. And in one of my Bible studies before, it talks about there being this turnaround, and a turnaround always starts with a step, Beth Moore says. And she's saying that Esther stepped through a door or an opportunity to get to the king. Really, she made a big step just by going to the palace and trying to be one of the girls who was picked. That was a big step for a young girl. And Haman kind of stepped off the earth, sadly. His desire to be famous and wealthy and powerful, and he ended up on the gallows, and that cost him his life. His violence that he had been putting out came down on his own head. And sometimes that feels fair to a man who has been so mean and so cruel that he would get his in the end, I guess is what she's trying to say. King Xerxes stepped in to prevent the plot from coming true. King Xerxes, I know he loved Esther, but he doesn't seem like a very strong man. It seems like, when Haman first came to him and said, "Oh, there's this group of people that I want to get rid of," and he doesn't question it a lot, and he just says, "Okay, well, you handle that, and here's my ring." And that seems a little bit foolish to me and not very thorough. You'd think that he would want to know, well, who are you talking about, and exactly what do you mean? And then when Mordecai and Esther are trying to come up with a way to overthrow the Jews, he doesn't really want to look foolish or like he's backtracking. So he says, "Well, you all just write this new thing and sign it in my name, and it'll be fine, whatever y'all want to do." So he doesn't always take a leadership position. He'll agree to stuff, but it seems like he's been lucky that he's had smart people or people around him who can help him get out of this bad situation. And Mordecai stepped up to his position to serve the king and serve his people. So he really is coming into his own in this. Esther's become a very wealthy woman in her own right, and then she's now got Haman's whole estate, and she's going to let Mordecai live there and take care of it. So they had gone, Esther and Mordecai, as Jewish people, had gone from being outcast to now being the highest ranking people in Persia besides the king. So, and just remember that once a royal edict or rule has been written, it cannot be undone. So the king's new decree didn't undo that. They're still going to be attacked on this day, but it allowed the Jews the right to defend themselves against anyone who tried to attack them. And he had to try to find a way for his first decree to not be undone, but to find a way for the Jews to not be killed. So he's able to save face in this and not feel like, oh, I'm powerless. And it's also interesting, I thought, at the end of it, that many people from other nationalities became Jewish because now they feared them because they seem to be becoming very powerful. And they seem to have someone on their side who was protecting them and working things out for their good. And of course, we know that was God. So that's the end of chapter 8. So we've only got 2 more chapters. In chapter 9, I'll just go ahead and share, is about the battle. And chapter 10 is just real brief. So we don't have a whole lot to discuss. Think about this week, and I think if Esther were writing in her prayer journal tonight, she probably is terribly relieved that Haman is gone, for one thing, and that they have found a way to protect themselves. And she's probably asking God to give them strength and wisdom and to know what to do and how to do it. So this week's This I Know says, God is the only one who is responsible for punishing those who try to hurt or destroy us. So here, Esther was just she had so much she wanted to say, and she ended up pointing it out. And in the end, Haman got justice, but she ended up saving the Jewish people. God's the only one who's responsible for punishing those who try to hurt us. I know that I can always wait on the Lord to exact His perfect justice in His perfect time. I need to trust in Him to take care of business and know that I may want things to happen quickly, but God's timing is always perfect. He always has a plan for me, a plan for my good and not to do me harm. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." So I imagine Esther is feeling really, really scared. And of course, the book of Jeremiah in the Bible comes after Esther. And so she hasn't read this yet, most likely. I'm not sure exactly about the exact times, but she does know that, and that's what they've been raised as Jewish people, to know that God's timing is perfect always, and that we can't really control that. And our closing prayer tonight, girls, is I'm going to lead us in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we love and praise you for your mighty plans. We do not always understand what or why something has happened, but I do know that you have it under control. And that's the way I feel about the coronavirus. I don't understand this. I don't know why this is happening. But I'm trying not to be afraid, because I know God is in control of all this. And I'm trying to be obedient and just follow the rules that the doctors tell us and how to stay safe. And I'm going to do that. And, over the last few days, we've kind of gotten a little bit of good news. Maybe they're going to start opening things up. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Lord, for being a loving and just God, and for always defending and protecting me. Lord, I know that you are always watching me, and even when bad things happen in my life, I pray that you will help me realize how you can be glorified through my reactions and actions and responses to the situation. Help me to never lose sight of you, Lord, and help me to always seek your word when I'm struggling. This I pray in your name. Amen. And it's interesting because I wrote this Bible study 11 years ago, and or maybe it's 2011, 9 years ago, I'm sorry. And that prayer just seems to go right along with what we're dealing with today, doesn't it? God is always in control, girls. We don't need to be afraid. We've got the God of angel armies on our side. So we are, I feel like we're protected. I'm just trying to be obedient. I'm trying to let my reactions, my responses to glorify God. And if there's things I can do to help, and I've been making masks, and I'm helping make some for some mental health, some friends of ours that work at the Mental Health Crisis Center, and I think that's a good thing for that then. So don't forget this week, to say your memory verse for the little blue bag. And let's see. Yes, for you, Lord, are kind. That one. For you, Lord, are kind and ready to forgive, abounding in faithful love to all who call on you. Psalms 86:5. So let me see your videos. I've only seen a couple, and I know you girls are probably so busy, but that's okay. Maybe we'll have a pretty day or tomorrow afternoon, and you can get them posted, and I can get these sent out this week. Girls, I love you very much. I hope you have a good day today on Sunday, and I will see you Wednesday night. Love you, honeys. Bye-bye.